place, so check this. This is the hard knock life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share their interests together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments and the lectures, fanboys, professional artists and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NOC. In full color, you see me. The hard knock life, comics, movies and TV. Yeah, pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this.
Episode 005, Hard Knock Life, coming at you. I'm your host, Keith Chow. Welcome back to the show. I got a great show lined up for you tonight. 3 great guests, all familiar faces, so I don't want to waste too much time to get started. We're going to talk about a little show that you may not have heard of. It's no one's talking about it, so I thought we should. It's a show called Breaking Bad. I figured not enough people are talking about it, so let's talk about it on Hard Knock Life. As you probably are aware, the show is ending this weekend. The finale airs Sunday night on AMC at 9 p.m. If you've been living under a rock for the last 5.5 years, it's a show about a high school chemistry teacher gets cancer, decides I'm going to start selling meth, and becomes a kingpin. And it's about his rise in the drug trade and eventual fall. And we're all excited to tune in Sunday to see how he falls and how hard he falls. So I gathered 3 of our favorite nerds of color to talk about Breaking Bad and to kind of discuss whether or not we should even be doing this show, because there's been some debate around NOC headquarters about, one, how nerdy the show is and whether or not it fits that aspect of our site, and also how of color it is, since it's about literally a person named Walter White, and there aren't too many brown folks on the show. So we're going to get into that tonight. We're going to talk about why we like the show, what we don't like about the show, what we think is going to happen. And the first panelist up tonight is a blogger that you can find, a resident sex blogger. You can find her at Blasian Bitch. She is on her record 4th Hard Knock Life in a row. Hardcore, our best panelist of all time. And Rhee, welcome to the show.
I feel I have to do these shows because it makes me feel a little less bad about not writing articles, or not writing them, just not submitting them so that other people could read them.
Yeah, it's like people are like, why is that? I look up J-Lo on the website and I don't see her. Why is she always on the show?
My life is hard.
Life is hard. Maybe you should start selling meth and make it easier.
I'm black, so I don't think that's going to work out too well for me.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about it. But thanks for being on the show. I'm assuming you're on the show because you like Breaking Bad, and you're.
I have seen every episode at least 2 or 3 times. So I would say yes, I do like the show. Do I think there's some problematic elements of it? Hells yeah. But I still think it's one of the most beautifully shot and well-directed shows on TV right now. And there's really no, noir that's on TV. And Breaking Bad, I think, kind of fills that void. And I'm going to be really sad to see it go.
Yeah, well, I think you and about 10 million other people, too. So thanks for being on the show tonight, Joe. Our next guest is a blogger out on the West Coast. She's currently located in Long Beach, California, I think, right? Long Beach. You can find her at Geisha School Dropout and Kimchi Mamas. She's all over the internet, and she's also our resident Cora expert on the Nerds of Color. Welcome, Julie Kang.
Thanks, Keith. Hey, Jayla.
Thanks for coming back and being on the show again. I'm assuming you're here because you are a Heisenberg groupie.
I am total Heisenberger. I'm actually more Team Pinkman myself.
Oh, there you go.
I adore him.
So it's probably been a hard couple episodes for you to be watching these last half of the season 5.
Yes, I am known to cry at the drop of a hat, and I bawl every time I see that tortured cry face that he makes. I mean, just the mother in me just cries out. I hope he catches one last lucky break. hopefully.
Well, then, if you haven't yet, you should Google Aaron Paul Price is Right, and that'll bring a smile to your face
Yeah,
whenever you feel the sads coming.
I was all over that. I was all over that before.
It's almost as if he was in character years and years prior.
I just imagine, in his head, like, bitch.
Bob Barker, bitch. Anyway, for those, we'll put a link to what we're talking about if you're like confused. Why are they talking about Price is Right? So anyway, thanks for being on the show, and we'll get to talk about Aaron Paul and Jesse Pinkman and some of the aspects of that character tonight, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm willing to talk about anything and everything. I love this show.
All right, and our final guest is another familiar face on Hard Knock Life. He is a criminology professor at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. He's currently in Hampton, Virginia right now, originally from New York. Welcome back, Shawn Smith.
Thank you very much. Hello, Julie and Jayla. What's up, everyone?
Hi.
So you are a criminology professor, so you must love what Breaking Bad represents for your class alone.
It certainly provides more talking points than your Law and Order SVUs or not that I have a major issue with those shows, which everyone knows I do. But no, I think it's for all that the show really was intending to be. I think it accidentally has become fodder for a lot of rather complex sociocultural and criminological discussions, and it actually has occurred in some of my classes already. So it's I guess in a way I can write certain lesson plans now and kind of relate it to, oh yeah, remember that episode where Jesse blah blah blah? Oh, now you understand strain theory because I can explain it from episode 1 to 4 of Breaking Bad. So.
Right.
Yeah, so it's definitely been interesting.
And it's curious that you say like how accidental it is, because sometimes watching how tight these 5.5 seasons of Breaking Bad have been, I wonder how much of it is accident and how much of it is, Vince Gilligan's plan from the beginning. So there's that aspect of it too. Anyway, but we'll get into all of this tonight. We are just going to be talking. I'm taking the title away from Chris Hardwick, and we're going to be talking bad tonight on Nerds of Color. So yeah, I'm taking it from you. But I think the first thing I wanted to kind of unpack before we get into speculating about the finale and kind of gushing over how great the show's been, and then tackling some of the problematic aspects that Jayla talked about. I know around the NOC headquarters, there's been a raging debate about whether or not we should even be covering this show. Up until this point, the things that we talk about on Nerds of Color have been comic book based, science fiction, fantasy, video games, the typical nerd milieu. So I mentioned I wanted to do a show about Breaking Bad because it's ending. It's the probably biggest thing in the pop culture zeitgeist right now, and there's been some pushback. So, Jayla, from a nerd aspect, do you think the Breaking Bad kind of fits into what we talk about on Nerds of Color?
I think it fits into Nerds of Color for a number of reasons. First and foremost, almost everything we talk about has been white male power fantasies. And Breaking Bad is a white male power fantasy on friggin' acid. So I think
on meth.
On meth, you would say, yeah.
So I think it definitely fits there. Not to mention, I just think the way that Breaking Bad is structured, it's a guy making his own mythos, which is a theme that you also see in a lot of stuff that we talk about. It is also a theme in a lot of nerd culture fiction. So I would say yes, and not to mention it's a dorky guy using science to take over the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if nothing else, what these last 5.5 seasons on AMC have been about is it's essentially a supervillain origin story. Heisenberg as this persona that has come to take over the world, and it does fall into a lot of genre tropes. There is a lot of comic book tropes. There is a lot of noir and western and a lot just kind of crosses a lot of genres. Julie, as a fan of the show and as a self-described nerd, do you think, as Angela said, the science aspect of it is enough to kind of qualify it in the? Because even though they use a lot of actual science, there's still a lot of fiction to the science, right?
Yes. I would think that when they first started out, like in the first 1 or 2 seasons, science was almost like the silent co-star of, between Walt and Jesse, and the way Walt solves problems and figures things out. He has a very kind of scientific method way of thinking and problem solving and observing the world. Of course, it has expanded way beyond that in later seasons to almost like a Shakespearean, tragic comedy type global, and where everything's a symbol and those symbols interact and everything's a allegory. But I think in its bones, it's science-y fiction, but not quite science fiction.
Right, and I think, and especially in the last couple seasons, starting with the kind of after before we go any further, just fair warning for those of you who are picky about spoilers, we are going to spoil everything. So if you are queasy about being spoiled on Breaking Bad, why are you watching the show? Turn it off and go binge on 5 seasons of Breaking Bad, and then come back. But,
real quick, if there's a way to do it, there might need to be a graphic that goes across the screen. Spoilers start now.
Yeah, because we are going to spoil the entire show. But anyway, I think starting with the death of Gus Fring and the way that, and I think even before that, there's a lot of kind of like surreal aspects to it.
Right,
and
exactly.
The people, it's not a crime show like Shawn said, in this way that Law and Order is a crime show. It really is. There is like a hyper reality to it, Shawn. So do you think that as far as like the kinds of tropes it tackles, the kinds of storytelling it uses, it falls in line with? That maybe explain why comic book nerds and science fiction fans kind of gravitate toward the show too.
But no, absolutely. I think to Angela and what Julie has also elaborated on, Breaking Bad clearly is a show that is portraying a character that is pretty far-fetched. I mean, not to say that Law and Order isn't a completely accurate depiction of the criminal justice process or anything like that, but Walter White is a largely hard-to-believe character, but believable enough that you're willing to follow him. Now, yeah, I mean, absolutely, he is very much a supervillain. I think he's presented as such. As Angela pointed out, he's a nerd. He starts off mild-mannered, chemistry teacher, meek of stature. I mean, we all see that. But I think for Breaking Bad, where it really falls into clear nerd territory, is when you think about, and I'm going to borrow a phrase from another nerd kind of subcultural movie, Unbreakable. Elijah Price makes an excellent point where he talks about how comic books have largely been argued as being real life, just exaggerated in pictorial form. Well, I think Breaking Bad is that. I mean, it is a pretty far kind of fantastical depiction of one character, but the idea of science being used towards nefarious ends, and particularly in this case towards the development of a really kind of hyper product of meth. Absolutely, yes. I think it falls within the milieu of our little nerd discourse.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to you can find discussions about this show on almost any kind of website that traditionally maybe talks about the kind of science fiction-y, superhero-y stuff that we kind of gravitate towards. But I think, again, it does fall in. I mean, there's a reason why, the rumors of Bryan Cranston playing Lex Luthor in Man of Steel have come about, right? Although I don't.
Doing it now.
Yeah, he's already doing it. Like there was a fan-cut trailer of like what a potential Man of Steel sequel would be, and they cut in Walter White. So I mean, I think you're right. It's the whole notion of this supervillain origin, and a lot of the tropes that they use and a lot of the hyper reality. I mean, I could see a Breaking Bad comic book, very easily.
Right.
Well, and actually, again, I think Julie made this point. Even the way it's filmed, there's absolutely a style of filmmaking that it has really, I don't know if I want to say pioneered, but it has certainly popularized. That draws you in much in the same way comic books would. It's very engaging in these awkward camera angles and these very weird backdrops that you just don't see in a lot of television shows. So I think in that, it's the way they film it. It's not hard to imagine them drawing out these stories in panel form, much the way comic books. So.
Yeah, and I think Angela was one who mentioned like it's such a well-directed show, and I think that's something that separates it from a lot of other television shows, and that the television genre is typically run by the showrunner, and which is the case for Breaking Bad. I mean, this is Vince Gilligan. His fingerprints are all over it, but at the same time, the directing of the shows, every episode, more than I think other television shows, the directing of the shows stands out, and the camera angles. Like there was when he's rolling the barrel, and the camera was in the barrel as it rolls. I mean, these are kind of innovative. And then you have the directors like Rian Johnson, who directed Looper. Directed a bunch of episodes for Breaking Bad, and I think her name's Michelle MacLaren, who's another director. I mean, not a lot of television shows focus on the director, and I think that's something that Breaking Bad has always been good at, with the just the imagery and the symbolism of like the pink bear floating in the water and things like that. And Jayla, so that was the first half of our name, Nerds of Color, and the debate. The other debate on the show, in our headquarters, has been about the of color aspect of the show, and that we are discussing a show that is ostensibly about white people. I mean, so much so that that's the name of their actual family. They are the whites, and the other guy's named Pink Man. So that should be a reason to disqualify it for discussion on Nerds of Color. And you mentioned that most of the things we talk about on the show are white male power fantasies anyway. So how does Breaking Bad kind of...
Well, I think there's definitely some problematic ways they deal with race, because this is a show where white criminality is like exalted, and when people of color are engaged in the same thing, they're villainous. Of course, I kind of think after watching more of the show, we're kind of it slightly addresses that maybe that's wrong, because you now have everybody in the vacuum after Gus is gone, and they're kind of realizing this Walter White guy is way worse, and he doesn't know what he's doing, and he has no compassion. He's not really doing it properly. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they're making that argument on the show because he's white and he just doesn't know how to be a criminal. I don't think they're saying that people of color are innately criminal, but I do think there is problems with how they deal with female characters, how they deal with characters of color. While I would say there are some characters that are like in the peripherals of the show that are very positive people of color, rest in peace to that poor officer. Yeah. Yeah.
He's probably the most. Yeah, I mean, if we're looking for like positive, for lack of a better word, or like heroic portrayals. I mean, Gomez is probably the most moral, most ethical character on the show, right?
And that's why you knew he was gonna. I'm sorry, but you knew, man. I mean, the episode.
As soon as the Nazis started.
Where the minute they started shooting, you just knew. Everybody on this panel knew. Damn it, Gomi's gonna get it. He's gonna get it. Man. Like, dude,
on Breaking Bad, you don't want to be a nice person of color or an Asian man.
You're gonna get blown up or shot in the face or just forget it. Crazy.
Well, Julie, I know that that's another aspect of the show is that it is essentially about the Walter White, his family, Jesse Pink, and then Hank Schrader and Marie are part of that, and then it's about Jesse and his circle of friends, Badger and Skinny Pete, and they're I mean the main characters top to bottom are all white. The only time there was a non-white character in the main cast is when Gus Fring was part of the show, Giancarlo Esposito. So is that a valid critique that the show essentially exalts white folk and kind of villainizes brown folk?
Yeah, whenever this kind of question comes up in any kind of other movie, you always get the group of apologists who say, "Oh, but it's on purpose," as it's meant to be a critique. And this is one of the rare shows where I actually think there is some credence to that. Like I feel, as much as Walter White, just kind of stumbles into the world of becoming a drug lord, and with the help of a lot of that magical luck that comes with white privilege, you can see that it's not clean. Like it's not it's a Pyrrhic victory. Every victory he earns is a Pyrrhic victory because he loses more and more and more of his soul, and that I believe is purposeful. And so I think it's in a way pretty brilliant, because it's a way for a lot of people who normally cannot talk about white privilege or even acknowledge its existence to actually, semi-dispassionately see it in action in its most, well, not the most, but a ridiculous end. And so I feel like that in and of itself makes it a valuable piece for discourse racially, even though you don't see a lot of people of color on screen. There are so many elements to the protagonist, the white protagonist, that makes it safe to talk about, white people and the privileges that come with it, being a middle class white person.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one of the appealing things, I guess, for lack of a word, about the show, is that it does
So
deconstruct.
is Walter White the Tim Wise of meth?
Yeah, well, so maybe, but I think there is some credence, and maybe it's not Walter White, but maybe it is Vince Gilligan. I mean, I don't know that it's an accident that his two lead characters from the jump have been white and pink men, right? Like there's something to the fact that, and it's because it is their privilege that allows them, especially Walter White, his privilege that allows him to kind of go under the radar for 5 seasons, or at least in Showtime a year and a half, because I don't know that the show, even though it's been on the air for 5 years, it has the reality of the show has only been, Heisenberg's only been around for about a year, but I mean that's kind of why he could hide in plain sight, and that a character like Gus Fring, who has a very meticulous, curated reality, and is very specific about his alternate personality, and he can separate the two, whereas Walter can literally hide in plain sight, and watching a lot of the older episodes, as a great a liar as he is, some of his lies were pretty bad, but people kind of believe it just because he's this milquetoast, mild-mannered high school teacher who's white.
Family Man too. Don't forget Family Man.
Yeah, like I don't care how much of a family man. Shawn, you're a family man. Can you go walk around a convenience store naked and talk about a fugue state?
I mean,
would you butt be in jail?
I mean, dude, come on, you know the answer to this question already. I mean,
but isn't that something that the show unpacks?
Well, it does, and I think I mean, I'm not going to speculate as to how purposeful it is, but I certainly feel like, on some level, Gilligan has this idea that when we think about drugs and when we think about the process of drugs, the culture of drugs, we have largely been duped into thinking that it is isolated into very specific types of communities, usually black and brown communities, usually in urban, densely populated areas, when in fact the vast amount of the drug trade is supported through suburban, relatively what we have classically called middle class, relatively well-to-do environments that typically also tend to be quite homogenous much like where Walter White lives and where Hank lives and all this other stuff. And in that way, I'm actually okay with the fact that there aren't that many black or brown people on the show, because quite frankly, most of the settings where this film takes place, I'm not expecting Walter White to interact with that many black or brown people, except maybe in the high school. For the most part, his neighborhood is largely white, and that's, yeah, okay, there are plenty of neighborhoods that look like that. And in fact, if anything, that's part of his cover. The fact that he's in white suburbia, where you would never think anybody would be cooking up methamphetamine, let alone of such a high quality, such a high grade. Yet here he is, Public Enemy villain number one. So,
and I think what the other thing that Gilligan kind of tackles with vis-a-vis Walter White is the notion, I mean, and how he maybe indirectly talks about white privilege, is that the sense of entitlement that Walter White has from the beginning. I mean, we talked about this off air before we started, but essentially, he's a public school, he's a high school teacher.
Yep.
They live fairly middle class. I mean, they have a nice house in the suburbs. They have a swimming pool. Yep. They drive. They have 2 cars. One's an SUV, even though it's an ugly ass Pontiac Aztek. It's still an SUV.
It's still a car.
It's still a car, and they still have 2 of them, and they got 2 kids. I mean, they live a fairly middle class lifestyle, and of course, the cancer diagnosis is a big punch in the gut. But again, if nothing, maybe Patrick Capino of National Film Society has talked about how Breaking Bad is really a critique of the American healthcare system, which is, there's probably some truth to that. But again, as a public school employee, I'm sure he's got adequate health insurance. So the idea that my family will suffer unless I resort to selling drugs, kind of is a way of his, a demonstration of his sense of entitlement, right?
And it's also a bit of a critique on our westernized patriarchal ideals of role assignment. I mean, if you think about Walter, the idea of Walter not being able to provide for his family. Now, this is something that is a theme that I'm actually stunned at how much Gilligan has stuck with this theme, but he really has made it a point that Walter justifies everything he's doing, all of the bad that he does, by talking about, it's for my family. I'm trying to provide for my family. My time is borrowed time, and I'm just trying to create a nest egg for my family. This idea that he absolutely, by any means necessary, must provide for his family, I think that largely plays into a rather antiquated but still very relevant notion that we operate under today in Western culture, which is that men must provide for their families, period. And providing doesn't mean I'm going to stay at home and raise kids, or I'm going to, keep maintaining houses. I have to go out and make money. I don't care how it happens. I've got to do that.
But then the dramatic irony is that how much of that is true, and how much of that is Walter White using that as an excuse, and it's really about providing for his own ego. And Jayla, I know that you said that there are problematic aspects of it, and that it's a white male power fantasy. But at the same time, I think it's also about this particular megalomaniac's downfall. And we're all speculating. Who knows? He could go out in a blaze of glory Sunday night. But
I still think if he goes out in a blaze of glory, it's pretty much a downfall.
Well,
he like Scarfaces it.
No, remember that he bought that giant friggin' gun that he bought. Like, whatever happened? Whatever happened?
Way too weak to use. So
it's like,
I mean, he was living in a snow cabin for the last 6 months. But you talked about earlier how, like, the white character is the hero and all the brown characters are villains. But really, is that really true? I mean, they are the antagonists.
Well, I think that's how they were presenting it. But I think the first time I watched it, I saw it like that. Then the second time I watched it, it was a lot of people of color reacting to this crazy guy who just comes with these illusions of grandeur and this giant sacco privilege, where he basically just comes in like, hey, I'm Walter White, I have these degrees, so I know how to run everything, which is just not the case, as we've seen, because he was in charge for not that long, and everything fell apart. And he caused so much more, like, pain and misery. I mean, Gus obviously, I'm not saying Gus is a good guy. He sold poison to people for many years, killing many people.
But he was also a pillar of the community.
And he never shot a kid in the face.
Right.
So.
Well, and I think, but that's kind of my question to you then, is that, you know, I mean, I think this is the challenge that Vince Gilligan has put out there for the world too, because, you know, I think Emily Nussbaum talked about how there are bad fans of Breaking Bad, and they are the ones who continue to root for Heisenberg, even though Vince Gilligan has himself said that he stopped rooting for, you know, Heisenberg long ago. So is it true then that the heroes are white and the villains are brown, when in reality it's a lot more complex than that?
Yeah, I do think that it would be oversimplified to say that.
Yeah.
But I think you get more characterization and more humanizing with characters that happen to not be of color and happen to not be female. I think this last season, I appreciated how they worked with Skyler's character and Rhee a lot better than I thought they handled in previous seasons, where it wasn't just Rhee is annoying, shrill klepto, and Skyler is the nag. I think this season you really can see that, you know, they got married for a reason. She's on par, if not a little worse than Walter White.
Yeah.
They both have that crazy family survival at all costs, much to the detriment of your family.
Right. Well, yeah. I think that goes back to Shawn's point about how even though they say it's for their family, nothing that they do is truly for the good of the family, because the good of the family would have been to not do it at all, right? So I'm glad that Angela brought up Anna Gunn, who just won an Emmy for her performance finally just the other weekend. There's been a lot of talk about how Skyler, and Jayla said she's a nag, and there are fans out there, yeah, and we see them. We live on the internet. We know what kinds of fans these are that have very, you know, venomous, like the things that Walter White said to her a couple episodes ago when he was getting her off the hook, when he had that phone call when he was just spitting bile at her. That's how, I mean, Gilligan basically just cut and pasted from a lot of message boards. So Julie
Cleaned it up.
Cleaned it up, but essentially kept the message. So, I mean, what do you think about how Skyler White, again, if you go back to a lot of the earlier episodes, you can kind of see how she was set up maybe to be this kind of barrier to, but again, that goes back to who are we really rooting for? Or should we be rooting for Walter White, you know?
Yeah, I actually stopped reading a lot of the recap posts and stuff on various websites because of people's animosity towards what in the beginning was basically a, you know, kind of annoying but mostly bland portrayal of a not so supportive wife, maybe a overtired, but just, you know, just kind of boring. But then all this animosity comes out, and I didn't realize that Skyler White would become this litmus test, this misogyny litmus test that would like bring people out of the woodwork as a like just saying these vile things. And when I saw that, it's not really a soliloquy, but like that vitriol speech that he does over the phone, the first thing I thought was like Vince Gilligan totally verbatim found something and just used these phrases that people have been hurling at her. And that's the reason why she wrote that op-ed, right?
Right. Anna Gunn wrote.
Yeah.
Anna Gunn wrote in the New York Times. She wrote an op-ed talking about the kinds of misogynistic reaction to her character and how that. Again, I think it goes back to the notion of like the good Breaking Bad fan and the bad Breaking Bad fan, and whether or not rooting for Walter White to succeed is really what we should be doing. I mean,
for a little while I was rooting for Heisenberg to rule everything again if he had Skyler by his side and they were both kind of like Mr. and Mrs.
Bonnie
Kingpin.
and Clyde.
Yeah. That I could have seen that possibly working.
No, I'm just as I'm thinking of I think, again, that just underscoring the point of why this show becomes so relevant in something called Nerds of Color, because, see, I think you do see a lot of back and forth where people are really rooting for Walter / Heisenberg, even though clearly he's involved in a rather nefarious act. And I think some of the vitriol towards Skyler is based around this idea of, well, Skyler initially, even though she doesn't know he's involved in the meth thing at first, is something of an enabler because, well, you know, she's always kind of, I guess, both implicitly and explicitly putting Walter in positions where he has to make this choice of, okay, I got to keep going for the family and all this other stuff. And admittedly, I didn't like Skyler very much at first, but I don't think I was supposed to. Like, I don't think she was presented to be a likable character.
Yeah, she's not. She didn't start out as a sympathetic character at all. But I don't think she ever was supposed to receive this absolute, just vile, 100% unfiltered hatred. Well, one thing about Skyler actually that turned me on to her, kind of intrigued me early on, even for the first season, was the times that they had sex, her and Walter, and how she had to submit to him when he felt powerless, and then he kind of took it out on her sexually. And I realized then that that they're gonna investigate that more. You know, that it's
abusive.
Not just, yeah, she's not just a fishwife, and he's not just some mild-mannered guy who keeps rolling over just to avoid conflict with her or whatever. Where it counts, quote unquote, he has no problem asserting complete dominance over her. So.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to the, I forget who said it, maybe it was Julie said that it's now become this Shakespearean drama where in the beginning it kind of felt like a Greek tragedy where the powers of the world were too much for him. He gets cancer and he's poor. Well, he's not even poor, but he can't afford the treatments, and then he gets screwed by his partners, gray matter, all these kinds of things that he has no control over. But really, if you pull back, it's not Greek, it's Shakespearean. It's all because of his megalomania. That is where all of these conflicts and tensions and the drama comes from. Is it's all centered around Walter White, and it's not about what the events of the world do to him. It's what he does to himself. And he's the Shawn talked about string theory. He is the root cause for everything. I mean, even the plane that explodes and kills all those people. I mean, you can tie it directly back to the actions of Walter White and not saving Jane. And, that action causes Q, even the all-powerful, omniscient Q, to direct two planes into each other and kills all those people. So even that is blood on Walter's hands. I say Q because the actor is John Delancey, who played Q on Star Trek. Star Trek Week. So the other main character on the show, other than the Whites, is Jesse Pinkman, brilliantly portrayed by Aaron Paul. And what's interesting about him is that I think even more so than Walter White, he has an interesting arc in that he starts off as a really unlikable kind of, he's a punk in the beginning of the show.
I always liked him.
I did too. I wanted to mother him.
Exactly. I always had that, there's so few characters on television that I wish I could just hug through the screen. My arms ache, just be it'll be better, even though.
But okay, but I think how much of that has been colored over the last 4 seasons, and the early Jesse Pinkman was, he was
in the first season when you see his heartbreak when his parents are basically just no more.
Well, right.
I think that's when I kind of started feeling I wish I could protect this character, or I wish there is somebody in his life, because I think that relationship with him and Walter is what got me to root for Walter, because I was okay, at least Walter is seeing this kid in new light, and he has this father-son relationship. So for me, once the big reveal that Walter's friggin' evil, I wanted nothing. I've been waiting so many episodes. I want to see Walter get it. He deserves every terrible thing that could possibly happen. I hope his dick falls off and his eyes bleed. So,
No, and I think
How do you really feel, Angela?
right? But that's it. Again, that goes back to I think what is brilliant about Gilligan and how much I think I think what sets Breaking Bad apart from a lot of shows is that the sense, and I don't know if this is true or not, and we can't speculate about the intent, but it's one of the only shows, and mind you, we have not seen the finale yet, but barring a terrible finale, it seems like it's one of the few shows where from the beginning they knew where they were going to go with this, and that everything that they've told has gone in a straight line, and you don't get that sense like when you watch Lost, where like, oh yeah. Even The Sopranos, for a certain extent, was like, oh, they're just kind of treading water now, and they're just kind of waiting for a season renewal. Whereas with Breaking Bad, it was like, no, we're going to tell this story, and we're going to hit all these plot points, and in the midst of all these plot points, we're going to develop these characters. And the thing about Pinkman is that I think you're right. I mean, the change came in the first season, but as a character in those first few episodes, I don't think he was meant to be like one. I think the plan was originally to kill him off very early in the series, but it's because of Aaron Paul's performance that, and like you said, that scene with his real parents and the relationship, the father-son relationship with Walter. I mean, Walter was a better father to Jesse than he was to Flynn, but he was a terrible father to Jesse ultimately, right? I mean, Julie mentioned that he was a abusive husband. He was a very abusive father in the way he treated Jesse, the way he talked to Jesse, the way he lets Jesse's girlfriends die. I mean,
yeah.
It's a terrible thought.
I think Walt is just, like, as a character, he is a cancer. Everything he touches goes to shit. Like, that's just how
Bravo,
Walter White is. He just eats things alive.
Yes.
Like, anything. If you have a use to him and you're more useful dead, you'll be dead.
Right.
It's very. You can't have a nurturing relationship with someone like that.
Right.
It's not possible. They don't have human empathy.
No, I was going to say, and all of it wrapped around this completely diluted notion that he's doing the right thing. Even his relationship with Jesse, you notice he clearly takes great pains to try and portray himself as being a father-like figure with Jesse, when in reality, anybody who watches the show understands, Walter, he needs the extra set of hands. To do what he's doing, he absolutely needs Jesse to be good. So if Jesse feels like, well, Mr. White really cares about me, then Jesse will be that much more dedicated to doing what Walter needs him to do. Over time, it becomes obvious it's a highly manipulative, really just dastardly relationship, and it's all kind of playing into, I think, the sympathy that you have for Jesse towards, really, I would even say, probably a little bit of season 1, but probably right around season 3, you get the sense, oh yeah, no, Jesse's totally being toyed with and played, and you do desperately wish for him to be shown the light so he can get away from White.
That's what I mean. I think all the speculation in the beginning of the second half of season 5, when you saw that a bearded Walter White has returned from who knows where to come back to Albuquerque, and everyone was thinking, oh, he's going to save Jesse. I don't think that's the case at all. Like Shawn said, the whole relationship between Walt and Jesse has never been about saving Jesse. It's always been about using Jesse.
Power. About power. And Walter clearly, go ahead.
Yeah, good. You finish your thought.
I was going to say it's about power, and Walter, as Julie alluded to, and Jayla as well. Walter clearly is power tripping throughout the entire show. He clearly craves power, and he is the creation of the blue meth. I mean, that it gives him what he so desperately lacked and craved up until this point. Even his relationship with Skyler. It's a power. He's trying to grab power in as many avenues as he possibly can, and finally, through the Heisenberg development, he realizes the power that he missed out on by not being a part of gray matter when it blew up, or by not, I guess, being more successful than he ultimately starts off as, as a high school teacher. I mean, he clearly needs that power enveloped around him in order to feel relevant, I guess.
Which I think goes back to why I think what sets this show apart from other anti-hero shows because that's the thing. I don't think he's an anti-hero. Like, people lump Breaking Bad in with Sopranos and Dexter, and you know, the notion that he's a flawed hero kind of thing, right? Because that's the thing about. I mean, Tony Soprano was a not a good person in the sense that he killed people for a living. But the thing I think about Tony Soprano is that, I mean, he wrestled with it, whereas Walter White doesn't wrestle with it. Like Shawn says, when someone is in his way, once he got that first taste of killing the guy, I forget his name, the guy that they dissolved in the basement.
Yeah.
From that point on, it was like, you know, no longer was killing a problem for him. Whereas, which makes him not an anti-hero, which makes him the villain. What I think is brilliant about the whole premise of the show is that it makes you as a viewer question your loyalties, because you are, like Julie says, rooting for him, and then you kind of go, wait a minute.
I think what definitely makes him a villain is that for him, not just the seeking of power, but he is a very principled person. Like, he has these certain norms that he does not defer, like these myths about himself. Like, he is a family man. He does everything for his family. You know, he is a smart man. Any problem, he's like the smartest man in the room, so any problem that he encounters, he'll be able to figure it out through
science or
like intelligence. And so he never ever defects from these principles, except when he does, but he immediately can justify it. Like, no, it's because of my family, or no, it's because he would be a danger to, you know, he threatened, you know, made a half-assed threat to, you know, my second cousin or whatever that might go back to Skyler, things like that. So, I mean, I think that's what a typical comic book villain is, right? Like, where somewhere, like, they have these, like, the principles override any other kind of morality, and then they're a purist, right, in their own bizarre, messed up way.
Well, that's what makes villains intriguing, is that they think that they're doing it not for the, I wouldn't say for the right reasons, but that there is justification for their actions. Like, whenever you have a dastardly villain who's just twirling mustaches, he's always less interesting to. I mean, this goes back to, like, you know, not to plug Shattered, but I'm going to go ahead and plug Shattered, available at Amazon.com. One of the reasons why we did the book is that the notion of the Asian villain is such a tired trope in fiction that we thought, well, it's not the villain part that's problematic. It's the one-dimensional, right? And it's kind of, if we can make a villain who is complex, I think there's something interesting about that story. And I think ultimately that's what Vince Gilligan did. He sat down and said, I want to make a story about a bad guy. Because even I wouldn't even equate him with Scarface, because I think there's parts of that movie where Tony Montana, you know, I mean, he's delusional and thing, but there are parts where you can kind of sense that maybe he is, you know, I mean, maybe I'm just waxing kind of nostalgic about the Scarface, but I feel like there are parts in that movie where he's, like, you know, remorseful for the things that he does, whereas I don't feel that in Walter White at all. Even the scene where he's crying after he, you know, makes that horrific phone call to Skyler, I still don't know that it's that he's a good person at heart, you know. And I think that's what Gilligan plays with the audience, is to make you sympathize with him and then turns it on you.
What ultimately I got out of it was, I don't know that he was. There was a point in that phone call when I think he realized just how evil he is. Like for the first time I realized I'm Magneto. I'm for real bad. Like, I'm not just kind of bad. I'm truly evil. And at that point where, you know, he leaves his, I think a couple scenes before, where he leaves his daughter in the fire truck and just kind of like, you know, I think there's this kind of moment where he's transitioning and realizes, yep, I'm so evil that I as much as I love, or at least think I love my daughter and think I love my family, I gotta run. I gotta get out, because I'm just cancer now. And I don't know that it's remorse, but I think it's self-actualization, like realizing how much of a villain I truly am.
Well, again, but I think that's what makes the writing of it so interesting, is that I really think Gilligan is playing with the audience. Like, he makes you sympathize. I mean, even the last episode, Granite State, we've seen 5.5 years of really terrible things that Walter White does. And there's a moment in that scene with Robert Forster where he pays him $10,000 to sit there and accompany him just because he's sad. And you feel bad for the guy, you know. But again, well, but no, I mean, I think there's you were meant to kind of like sympathize with like this dying man who's lost everything, lost his family, lost his fortune, lost everything, and is losing his life. He's wasting away in his cabin, and he's so devoid of human contact that he pays this guy $10,000 just to sit with him. And there's a sadness in that scene, and you know, I think again that goes back to like makes you as a viewer, and I think that's the best fiction that makes you as a viewer kind of question where your loyalties lie and what you sense is more moral and just.
I feel so bad because when I watched that, I was like, good, you sit there and you be sad.
You know, I was actually angry for a lot of it because I'm like, any decent human being would have killed themselves by now. Like, they would not force anybody to, like, drag chemotherapy drugs all the way from Albuquerque to New Hampshire. And then I had to, like, pause, and I'm like, I can't ever think that. Like, what? Like, I just, like, I am, like, a really bad person for even thinking that. But I don't know. It was a very frustrating episode, besides like feeling a little bit sorry for the old man in the shack. But
what Gilligan the part about playing with the audience, there's particularly when Walter shoots Mike, and you know Mike is dying, and ultimately does die. The third partner they had for a while. Now my thing with that is, okay, the moment where I really felt like, really sad when Mike died sitting on that rock or whatever, with Walter standing in front of him, Mike is a terrible guy. I mean, he is really not a good person. And yet, here again is one of those scenes that Keith is talking about, and I think we've all been alluding to, where you find yourself compelled to feel badly about someone who really is just a terrible. Even Jesse. Listen, Jesse is not completely innocent. Yeah. He's done terrible things too. He has. He totally has.
With Jesse, you feel more that he's doing it because he's between a rock and a hard, like a real rock and a hard place where he has no support system. He has no place to go to.
Guilty as all.
He can still go to jail. I mean, Jesse, he's still a murderer.
Oh yeah,
he's
absolutely.
A drug dealer.
Oh yeah, I mean the minute he didn't go to the cops and say, "Hey, Walter White's cooking meth," but yeah, absolutely. I mean, just this whole back and forth, and actually that's something that I definitely feel is reminiscent of how we oftentimes are presented with villains in comic books. I brought up Magneto before. I'm always at odds with whether I want to call Magneto a villain. There are plenty of times where I just say, he's not a villain. Because given the set of circumstances that he's presented with, while you could say, kind of mass genocide of humanity in favor of mutants seems like a bad thing, you know what? Actually, if you listen to his argument, he makes a lot of really good points. I mean, he does. It's hard. He does. He really does. So anyway, that I think that very much is where Breaking Bad would fall into classic nerd material, in the sense that there's this constant back and forth of what's really good and what's really bad, what's truly heroic versus what's truly evil, and so. Yeah,
well, and I think that goes back to my point about why Walter White is often lumped into that kind of anti-hero trope, but or archetype. But I think if anything, it's been made clear that he's not an anti-hero. That he is clearly a villain, and any I mean, especially like in the last 2 seasons, like his boys are neo-Nazis. Like once you align yourself with the Nazis, for everyone out there who still roots for Heisenberg, like it gets to a point where you're like,
okay, no mas, I give up. Yeah, he's like
like when you shake, like there's that scene in the last episode where they shake hands. Danny, is that his name? I forget his name. Uncle Jack, whatever. Like
Yeah.
they shake hands, and all you see is the swastika shaking hands with Heisenberg, and you're like, yeah, it's probably not time to root for Walter White anymore.
Yeah,
And
you,
yet,
you gotta put away your Team Heisenberg shirts.
but yeah, I mean, I'm
Well,
sure.
Heisenberg was a Nazi doctor, so I kind of feel like they were preparing us for that moment for quite some time.
But that's again, that goes back to the point that like he may be the protagonist of the show, but he is not the hero. We're running out of time, and I wanted to get to everyone's. I know you probably don't like to predict or to speculate, but why the hell not? So before we send the show to Belize for one last time, what do you think is going to happen in Felina? Oh, and by the way, if you haven't noticed, the last episode is called Felina, which is an anagram of finale, and it's Felina. And I saw on Twitter somewhere that those are the elements that stand for iron, lithium, and sodium, which is blood, meth, and tears, which is kind of brilliant. So that being said, what do you think is going to happen? So we left off Granite State. Walt was about to turn himself in. He called Flynn. Flynn told him off. Realized he had lost his family for good. Was about to turn himself in, and then Charlie Rose ex machina shows up, and he sees the Gray Matter duo kind of erase Walt from the history of the Gray Matter company. He also finds out blue meth is still on the streets. What do you think? And that honestly, that's also my favorite. I think the best use of the Breaking Bad theme. Like you hear the full theme for the first time, which is pretty awesome. When he realizes and you see Walter change. What do you think is going through his head, Julie, when he's watching Charlie Rose in the bar? And what do you think that will lead to in Felina?
Well, okay, I think what you're supposed to think is that because you already know that he goes back and he celebrates his 52nd birthday at Denny's or whatever, and then he gets that gigantic gun in the trunk. So I think what you're led to believe is that he's going to go completely postal and just start...
Say hello to my little friend!
Exactly. And so because that was kind of...
I did that in like a British accent. That was really weird. I'm sorry.
I don't think that was any accent.
Hello!
That was...
Sorry, Julie, go ahead. So he's back with his big-ass gun.
So that's what you're led to believe, and that's kind of the easy conclusion to come to. So I think it's not going to be that, and it's going to be maybe one last, I'm going to predict one last, what do they call it, like a shootout or a stand down or whatever, between him and Jesse, and then, because Jesse's going to somehow escape from the dead-eyed neo-Nazis.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about Todd. That dude's creepy. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So you think the gun? So you think the gun is for the Nazis? He's going to go show up.
Yeah, and he's gonna rescue Jesse. Yes, he's gonna rescue Jesse, but then Jesse's gonna be like and kill him, and I'll be like yes.
So that's what Julie thinks is going to happen. Shawn, what do you think? So 2 questions then. What do you think went through Walter's mind when he was watching Charlie Rose? What goes through your mind when you watch Charlie Rose? And what do you think is going to happen in Felina?
Question 1. I think at the point where he's listening to I forget the names, but basically his friends from college or whatever, kind of talking about how he really wasn't a part of Gray Matter. Again, that's one of those pivotal points where I think he truly realizes all the quote-unquote good that I associated myself with at some point that I was using as a mask to try and hide myself from my true evil. Well, that's gone now. Like, clearly, that part of me, however fake or real it was, that's done now. I'm not even really Walter White at this point. I'm this Heisenberg dude that I concocted. So I think that's part of what was going through his mind. I don't know that I thought about it much more than that. But as far as what I think will happen, I don't think Jesse's making it. I don't think he's making it. I think he's gonna die. And I don't even think I think if Julie's correct, I don't think Jesse will be alive when Walter reaches him. I really think Jesse's gonna die. It's too much of a tortured series of events for it to end well for Jesse.
Yeah,
That's true. He's permanently damaged.
Jesse killing Walt is too much of a happy ending.
Yeah, it's like I can't see that.
A girl can dream.
And by all means, that's the best advances in the world were started off as dreams, but
you also think it's you think the M80 is meant for the Nazis?
I think it's intended to, but I don't even know that Walter is gonna make it that far. I swear, I feel like there's a part of me that secretly hopes he just offs himself. But I don't.
M80.
Well, no. That's a bit extreme. I mean, come on now, I mean, you could have gotten a 38 for that. But no, I think he has some intent to kind of go back and go after Uncle. Who is it? Uncle? What is his
Jack?
name?
Is it Jack?
I think it's Uncle Jack. Whatever.
The Nazis.
Yeah, but I don't think Walter's going to make it that far. I think I do believe, however, I think Walter is going to end up living, and I think the reason why is because if I understand Gilligan's kind of intent throughout Breaking Bad, I guess maybe part of me feels like he's going to want you to walk away with this idea that we like to think that true evil can be eradicated. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it just keeps going on living until it dies a natural death. I mean, Idi Amin Dada, he lived for a long ass time after they booted his ass out of Uganda, and he's somebody who definitely should have died a horrible death, but he just kept right on going. So, I like to think that Walter just is dismembered, and what was it in jail? His penis? Yeah, sure. I'd love to think that his penis would fall
eyes
off.
bleed.
Yeah, absolutely. But I just don't. I don't feel like that's gonna happen. I feel like Jesse's probably gonna just get shot or just take it.
It's at this point too.
Yeah.
For Jesse surviving is like the worst hell for him probably.
Right. Like I don't even know him living would be a good idea anyway. So.
Unless he goes and he raises Brock or something. Anyway, Angela, what is same two questions. What goes through Walt's mind when he sees what Charlie Rose on TV?
I think that's just his absolute breaking point, where he's done being a human being, I think. I think us normal people looking at Walter White, the evil, we're like, he's not a person. But I think that's the moment where Walter White now says, oh, being a human being is useless. All my wants and needs and desires for any sort of normalcy, out the window. And I just, nothing good could come from it. Nothing good could cover it. How I would like the show to end? I guess he takes that giant gun and maybe he has fashioned a meth-powered mech, and that's his giant handgun for the mech. And he just goes through Albuquerque, just leveling the place.
Like he takes those big steel containers and creates a That's awesome. I was going to give you my prediction.
Absolute sci.
That brings us.
And the whole time he had mech technology, and that's what he used his millions of dollars for.
I think Angela won the episode.
Oh God! If it ends that way, kudos to you. That would be.
And then everybody at the NOC headquarters who's giving me crap about doing this show, boom, there you go. Yeah. Giant meth
Their
mech.
soapbox would be completely demolished.
The giant meth
powered mech.
Yeah.
Raises New Mexico. That's awesome.
Yes. Because gray matter, they grew this giant brain, which is why they call it gray matter, which we find out is sentient and now needs his blue meth to live.
Why?
And then we have to call the Avengers to come in. Oh wait, different show.
This is why Angela should be on Vince Gilligan's writing crew. So I want to thank Julie, Shawn, and Jayla for joining me tonight to talk about Walter White and Heisenberg and everything about Blue Myth. So come back next week. We've got another great show lined up. I'm wearing a Mountain Brothers t-shirt. If you haven't noticed, check out their new video, Keep On, Strength in Numbers, Chops. He's bringing back Asian American hip-hop. We are Hard Knock Life, and I'll see you next week.
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV. Yo, pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the Hard Knock Life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share their interests together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments, and the lectures. Fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life.